Welcome back, everyone, to the next session. We have a wonderful panel here. This is a panel discussion on career awareness and readiness from school to career. So this is moderated by Priya Agrawal. She is the founder and director of Antrang Foundation with 28 years of experience across advertising, market research, education, and employability. We also have the panelist Devashish Thar. He is a public policy specialist at the Office of Vice Chairman, Niti Aayog, Government of India's think tank. He has work experience across policy making, consulting, speech writing, and equity research. We have Manisha. She is the head of CSR and philanthropy, India for JP Morgan, and is a member of the global philanthropy team. She manages all grants for India, driving the firm's philanthropy and employee engagement strategy across the country. We have Sarah. She's a design research manager, opportunity for all youth. She has experience working in youth employment, entrepreneurship, and leadership programs in Canada, housed in the Emirates Solution Lab in Toronto. We have Shahida. She's on monitoring and evaluation team at Antrang Foundation. She's on our panel as the youth representative and is a strong advocate for youth employability. Thank you so much for coming here. Welcome, everyone. Over to you for the panel discussion.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and a very good afternoon to all of you. Thank you, TFI and FIRCI for giving us this opportunity to host this extremely important discussion. So after school, what? This critical transition from high school to higher secondary or vocational education needs clarity and thought, especially in the light of the new education policy, talking about having one of its goals is increasing the gross enrollment ratio into higher education, right? And also in the light of the right to education extending to age 18 becoming a reality pretty soon. It is imperative that every child stays on in education at least until the age of 18 and makes informed transitions on from high school into higher education or work. This panel will focus on the role of career awareness and career readiness in informing this transition. I have the absolute pleasure of having multiple viewpoints on this panel. We have Shaida, who's recently made the transition and has a lived experience of the transition. We have Manisha, who's worked with several, organizations, supported several organizations in the ecosystem and has a varied perspective and a very diverse multi-sectoral perspective on this. We have Sarah, who brings in an international perspective, especially a developed nation perspective, and Devashish, who brings in the government perspective as well. So let's get started right away. My first question is really to Shahida, because you are at the center and your age group is at the center of this discussion. You recently made the transition from education to work. Your younger brother recently completed school. So what are some of the challenges and issues that young people like you face in this decision of after school what?
Okay, thank you, Priyati, for having me here. Thank you, everyone. So if I talk about few of the challenges, I would say that most of us are the first generation learner. So as being a first generation learner, what we really lack is support from our parents and our society. And even if I talk about our siblings, the first generation siblings, even sometimes they are the first generation itself or have not completed education. And given to this, our young people are left on their own to make decisions on education, career, and the next steps without a proper thought process. And currently, if I talk about a student coming from a public school or government school, or even talk about junior college, they really don't have anyone to help them to decide what is the next step for them, which really leads the student to make decisions on education and career choices that are not really falling in their favor.
Absolutely. I think that makes a lot of sense. The lack of a guide or somebody to actually guide you. Absolutely. Thanks, Shahida, for that perspective. Manisha, if I may ask you, you've seen the issues and challenges of this transition in pretty close quarters through the several organizations that we've supported over the years. So what, according to you, is really the critical issue that needs to be addressed in this transition?
So I think Shaida's kind of hit the nail on the head from the perspective of young people who are making this transition. There is no guidance to help them figure out how to get to their aspirational jobs. There's very little guidance in terms of what their capabilities are. So there may be aspirations which are defined by peer groups, by sort of external stimulus, but those may not really be best what their inherent capability is towards. So I think that is one thing that is missing pretty significantly for a lot of young people. And Priya, some of your research also shows that. And the second thing, sort of more from a larger school to work transition perspective, at a macro systemic level, we see that employer engagement in this process is very limited. So there's a lot of jobs, and you'll always find employers saying that the jobs are there, we can't find the right people. And then you have the right people like Shahida saying, well, we don't know where to get to those jobs. So it's a gap. I mean, just very simply put, it's a gap that seriously needs to be bridged to make everyone happy on both sides of the stream.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, Manisha, for that. And in fact, this leads me to, I guess, the next question, Devashish, if, what Manisha pointed out is absolutely true, right? So there is a lack of industry involvement. This also seems to be a little bit of a policy black hole, this 14 to 18 age group, where the transition is being made, right? So how do you think the government has looked at this transition so far? Does this whole school to higher education, school to work larger transition at a systemic level, does it even sort of appear in the aspirational districts program or the smart cities agenda or any of the government agenda really?
So I think the conversation is, by the way, thank you so much for having me. And I think the conversation is flowing very nicely in a bottoms up approach. What Shahida has said is absolutely right, and what Manisha has said has built over it. And now I think the government explanation around what is happening is sort of an organic or evolution for that matter. So for instance, say 15 years ago, the problem was accessibility, and then the right to education came. And the right to education came, and the government resources were sort of stretched a little too thin. We were running thin on the resources, but we tried to include everyone through a number of schemes within the formal education system. We did that, and after 5-7 years, we saw, oh no, the problem is now becoming learning outcomes. People are moving closer to the cities. That's the problem. Now, over the 5-6 years, I've been at NITI for the last 4 years, and I've been constantly hearing about learning outcomes from everyone who comes to NITI Aayog, and every discussion that is happening that is related to India's economic growth. So everyone now knows that it's about learning outcomes. So that problem is already sort of acknowledged. And if you look at the new education policy, it sort of addresses to that issue as well. So now we are trying to get ahead of this learning outcome issue. Now we are sort of organically moving towards this career awareness thing. And as you rightly said, there's a black hole around this 14 to 18 years of age group. Now, I would say that what someone like I or Manisha or the government can do is something to formal institutions of governance and help people come into the system and be made employable. But I think we need a lot more about informal governance structures which sort of push people in or rather pull people in within this net. So I think that's already happening, and it will happen because of 3 reasons. One is, once the growth keeps coming in, more and more people will be uplifted and they'll have awareness to that. First is that. The second is the democratization of the knowledge through social media platforms, to the badges, to the upgrades and stuff like that. I mean, people are already starting to learn coding now. Of course, that's only a small share of population, but over the years, this information will also be further democratized. It will become cheaper for people to access it and sort of explore it. And third is, I see more and more sort of informal institutions and the states and cities sort of stepping up to the game, because it's not about central government. Education is more of a state and a city or a cluster level issue from how I see it. And I think that's where the interventions have started to come in now, whether focusing on learning outcomes, whether employers around a certain cluster are focusing on, okay, this is my target population. I want to train them on these skills, and this is how I'm going to start these institutes. Like Tata's have been doing it for years now. Reliance has been doing it for years now. But more and more employers are now sort of getting into that space. And I think those are the 3 factors that will pull people up in terms of making them more employable right after school education. And this black hole will sort of, hopefully it should be a bridge soon.
Thank you, Devashish. Yeah. So, Sarah, if I could bring you into the conversation now, right? So, Manisha spoke about the need to make sure that industry is employed. Devashish spoke about how organically, we've sort of countries like India have moved from one issue, sorted that out, and then moved on to the other issues. So, what's really is something like this still an issue in a developed nation like Canada? The school to higher education work transition, is it still an issue at all? So what's the developed nation perspective? What are the issues and challenges that young adults face while making this transition in Canada?
It's quite interesting to hear Shahida say to reference first generation learners. There's still quite a gap within formal education, really teaching that skill set of how do you take your skills and turn it into a career, and how do you understand what's the future is going to look like for different careers so that you can prepare yourself. Because it is still quite a deep issue, and we're talking, especially within sort of first generation Canadians, more of our marginalized communities that typically sit at a lower percentage, but every time we don't bring this sort of education into formal spaces, it disproportionately disadvantages further because it's sort of like this unspoken of skill set that people acquire through life experience or demonstration through their parents that came before them or the community they're a part of. And it's a big push right now to open the conversation up into formal spaces for exactly that the effect is not felt equally across all of our communities in Canada. And so as if we look at the macro level, we're not going to meet industry needs unless we have a more inclusive approach to how we're bringing people into employment education. And I think, there's lots of like after school programs and there's lots of other sectoral support to teach those skills, but it's like, I'm sure Shahida, who's been through we've all been in education structures, that the more reinforcing messages you can get early on, because we're asking young people, they recently made a shift, particularly in the Toronto schools, of asking young people to choose a certain track of education early in high school, grade 8 or grade 9, without actually giving them the tools to make the informed choice as to what the consequences are of choosing one path or the other for a career choice that might come 6 or 7 years down the line. So it's a critical part of looking at, do we view education as a closed box of learning skills, or do we see education as preparation for how you're going to engage with the world later? And those critical skill sets, I think one of the things that's happening right now in Canada with COVID and with a social movement around anti-racism is looking at very critically who in society is benefiting from sort of the informal structures that have been set up, and how do we pull more people in for learnings that are so critical for success later. And Deloitte Canada just released their forecast for 2030 that looked at the number one skill needed for success is going to be lifelong learning, because economies are changing so quickly. And that by 2030, we're going to expect to have a worker shortage in key sectors. And so when I think of that 14 to 18-year-old age group, that's the age group that in 2030 should be filling those gaps. So without industry input and without pulling those pieces together, they're at a point where they're expected to make choices now, and the understanding of that needs to pull all those pieces together to be able to continue to keep the economy going.
Absolutely. And I think you sort of brought out a very relevant point, Sarah, right? This 14 to 18 age group, a decade down the line, is going to be the workforce over there. And we don't really know the skills that are going to be required. And therefore, this whole, focus on lifelong learning. But if you look at skills education, it's fairly short-term focus currently, serving the needs of industry today. And that's sort of the dilemma that the sector has also got caught in today. So, I mean, if you can again give us a little bit of insight into some of the solutions that have worked to address this challenge in Canada and through Mars, through the work that you do, that'll be great.
Yeah, so I think Manisha mentioned that not enough industry is brought into the idea of skills development and employability growth. So Opportunity for All Youth came out of the Mars Solutions Lab, which at the Mars Discovery District in Toronto is really looking at what are the systemic, how can we solve systems issues? So we're working with employers who really view it from, they have a lot of jobs that they can't fill right now. The government who's funding employment services programs, a significant investment, and to know that they still can't find young people to fill those jobs. And the employment sector who is pushing people through as fast as they can, and young people saying, well, we still can't find those jobs. That's indicative of where we would sit as conveners to say, how do we solve the problem together? And it does take a pretty special group of employers and who are willing to say, we're not just going to look at what we need, we're going to look at how do we, as one piece of a broader industry or multiple sectors, grapple with this issue of a huge amount of funding, and the results are not meeting us where we're at. And one thing that we've discovered through our work is that there's not enough young people, there's not enough youth involved in planning and designing and sitting in spaces where they can say, actually, I don't know these things, or I'm not up to speed on, what entry-level work is looking for right now. And so that's one thing from a solution space that we've started to push really heavily towards, is that whenever we're going to be in a space to design solutions, there have to be young people there. One, because if they're not going to use a system for whatever reason, if they're not accessing employment services, then that pipeline is not great for employers. If it's only going to reach 20% of the young people that are looking for jobs. For government, it's saying, is that the best investment to only look at that single pipeline, or should we be investing more in education systems and bringing it earlier into curriculums? And so for us, we sit at that very systems level space to try and get people out of a single perspective and say, where can we leverage different points of influence in the system? And so for us right now, it's very much around pulling young people into the process and allowing them to really talk about what the experience is, what the gap is, because there's a lot of people within the ecosystem that want to speak for young people. And quite frankly, we've all aged out of that experience, and it has changed drastically. We're looking right now with COVID, we've gone from an 8% NEET youth population, which is not in education, employment, or training, to 25% in a matter of 6 months. And so that lived experience has to inform how we change systems.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think in India, we're looking at close to a 40% post-COVID who are NEET, which is absolutely frightening.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for that, Sarah. So, Devashish, if you can add your perspective on what are some of the solutions that you've seen working to solve this challenge.
Absolutely. So I think what Sarah said is something that is happening in India, but with a different nuance, because it's a different sort of development trajectory here. But it's happening here as well, in the sense that we get a lot of partners, and it would be unfair for me to mention some names and not others, who are doing some really, really interesting work, who are focusing just on either districts or working with state governments. NITI Aayog has a partnership with state governments. We ensured that we do not only improve the learning outcomes, but also improve the employability of the children. That's happening. And then we kept on brainstorming with the NSGC as well. We got on some other partners, which were sector-specific NSGCs, where we try to ensure that, okay, if you're looking at this sort of skills and this sort of age brackets, that what sort of other partners could be brought in. Now, the trouble is that from the central level, you can do only as much. And that's where some of the states which have emerged as pioneers, and they should be recognized as much. Like, for instance, Himachal Pradesh, Punjab, Gujarat, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, and Karnataka, they have done a phenomenal job. I mean, we usually associate these states with a high skill sort of job, but we should also understand, as Shahida also rightly mentioned, that because you have these first time learners, first time graduates, it's very important for them to have that exposure. And that's what, and we should recognize that people who are, say, suppose third generation graduates or third generation learners, they are moving into a different space. And so a new space is being created for the first learners and second learners, as well as they're also competing for the same space as the third generation learners. So when you recognize that, when states recognize that, they're able to provide that holistic sort of learning from 11 to 12. So if you look at what NV has tried to done, it has changed the schooling structure, which I think is very, very important and is going to unlock a lot of value. The government has put a lot of emphasis on the apprentice program, because that brings the students directly in touch with the industry. So I think that is really, really important. The 14 to 18 age bracket is sort of also catered by NITI Aayog's Atal Innovation Mission, where we sort of set up those Atal Tinkering Labs. Of course, Atal Innovation Mission caters not to the entire universal of that age group, but it does attract to a certain age group where we can sort of spur innovation and they could become net job creators. I mean, we need to attack this problem from all levels and at all different sort of, target groups that we can subdivide the problem into. So Atal Innovation does that as well. If you look at, we have some very interesting case studies out of Aspirational Districts program, where the DMs have taken the lead, working with the state bureaucracy and the counterpart from the central bureaucracy, where they've identified that, okay, suppose my district is exporting this particular product, and I know that these are the skills that I would need. So that's how they've partnered with the nearby villages, with the very urban area schools, and they've tried to train the students who can get on the job training as well, and eventually the job there as well. There are institutions now in India. There's one in South, and I'm sort of refraining from mentioning organizations because I shouldn't be mentioning certain organizations. But what that basically a business does is that it runs a textile industry, and it has a lot of people who work and stay at the campus. What they've done is they've also started training and educating them for the last 10 years or something. So the people who are working there, who joined as, say, suppose a 10 pass or 11 pass or 12 pass, they get graduated while they are working, and then they move on to other jobs as well. So there are solutions coming from everywhere. It's about sort of absorbing them and scaling them. But at the same time, we should understand that the real solutions need to come from the cities, not even actually the state, from the cities and the clusters, essentially.
Right. And it's interesting that, you talk about multiple solutions and not just one or two solutions that the government itself would scale up. And I think that's something to think about. And you mentioned the apprenticeship scheme, which we're hoping will become far more popular and,
I think that's where the role of organizations such as yours come in the sense that it is possible, it is required of us to have this informal coalition of people who are, say, first generation and second generation learners, who really appreciate the value of, okay, how does it feel to come from a certain sort of challenges and still be able to deliver it, to have this coalition and speak to as many young people as possible. And young people are much more enterprising than we really think them to be, because we see a lot of AIM students coming to NITI Aayog. We have had a chance to interact with them. They're extremely, extremely enterprising, and we should sort of try and give them those opportunities. And it's just about having those single conversations with the young people. Once they know that these are the possible career opportunities, those people will figure a way out. One way or another, they don't need support from anyone, honestly. So far as their interests are safeguarded. I mean, and that's where the role of the government comes in, essentially.
True, that's true. With a couple of questions, I'm just mindful of time. So if I can direct the first question over here to you, Manisha, where Ravina has asked if we can bring in professionals from several areas into classrooms, then offering students just science and commerce approach. So you've supported a bunch of organizations that are doing multiple, fairly innovative solutions in this space. So if you can, talk to a question like this and talk about a solution at scale that's innovative and that's been engaging that you've seen.
So I think it's not so much about necessarily bringing in professionals, but from what I'm picking up from the source of Ravina's question is, how do you make the classroom an interesting place to learn and at the same time practical? We've seen programs which sort of have, flipped learning being a very basic way where some of it is self-learning. This generation is particularly technology savvy, likes to do a lot of things on the phone, spends a lot of time on the phone. So how do we sort of leverage that to make it more exciting and interesting? And I can see Shahida nodding, so she totally gets what I'm saying. So that's one. I think there's people who've tried that. The other ways that people have tried is saying that even how do you make it more interactive? And a lot of the learning, and Sarah can sort of talk to that, is in the Western world is a lot more about preparing or self-learning and then coming back and sharing ideas and sort of evolving the thinking from that. So there's a lot of peer learning, which works a lot. But I think fundamental to the whole thing is, again, just underpinning Ravina's question is the change in the approach of transfer of knowledge from a teacher or a trainer to a student is, where are you coming from? Are you coming from the perspective that both of you spoke about, Sarah and Priya, that this is really the workforce of tomorrow who we are addressing today? Or are you coming from, my job is just to get this kid to the next class, right? So I think it's that perspective that changes. Industrially, sort of professionals makes it very interesting. Sometimes it's not possible to structure that, but sort of day in a life of a certain job, some of which, Priya, you're also working on. All of that makes it very interesting, but making it real, not theoretical for the young people. And I refrain from calling them kids because these are really young people who are at the brink of their career transition. So I think there's a whole lot of stuff that is being experimented on. Unfortunately, we haven't seen much gone to scale yet. I'm hoping the national education policy gives an impetus to that for more of these innovations to come out, but nothing that's really gone to massive scale yet.
Absolutely. Now, there's another question from Dr. Dutt, and Shahida, maybe you can answer this. How does a first generation learner get the best guidance? So what's worked for you? You've been a first generation learner. You're at the cusp of a dream career. You've already started working in what seems to be something that you'd like to pursue. So how did you get the best guidance? We can't hear you, Shahida. You're on mute, I think.
Thank you. So what really helped me as being a first generation learner to figure out what next is really having a family which has been supportive in terms of allowing me to what to choose. Like if I want to pursue something and I think I'm a bit clear about it, my family has supported me to do. Secondly, what really helped out me as being a young person and first generation learner is that I did this extracurriculum activity like Career Ready program. A program like this really helped me, to at least start thinking about what next. For me, my transition has not really been a thought-through transition. I started from science in junior college and then I ended up in IT. But right now, if you see what I'm doing is I'm really passionate in the social sector and working with data. So my transition has really not been a thought through, but yes, as Devashi said that we tend to figure out what next. And for me, I've been a lucky person that I figured out it very earlier, and I'm in a social sector. So these kind of things really helped me.
Yeah, so I guess interventions at the right time, we're lucky that family support is a really big one. So I guess even organizations, schools, and the government, I guess, in this space, if we can encourage more parents and families to be part of it, right, is I think that's a really critical point. Sarah, if you can answer this question from Prabha. Adolescent children, how do they decide their future at this COVID time, during this time of COVID, and how can society, civil society support them?
Yeah, I think it's an exceptionally challenging time to make decisions. And one thing we have found, and I would be interested to know in the Indian context, one thing we found is that mental health is becoming a big challenge for young people who are either could not return to school because they lost out on their summer job because there wasn't a placement available, are sitting on an emergency benefit package from the government, or just working an essential job where they are faced with a health crisis every day when they go to work. And so those are the decisions that are sort of in the moment, what is driving them. And one thing we found across all of this, the civil service and the social service providers that we work with, is that they've shifted from how do we get people into a job into how do we build momentum for a post-COVID experience. So how do we keep people engaged and invested in their future when the day-to-day decisions are really quite overwhelming? And so a lot of like innovative approaches around grabbing into that digital space that young people are digital natives on, and basically organizations trying to catch up with the literacy that young people have there. And so we've seen a lot of uptake in different webinars and different online trainings, and even just support groups and conversation circles that you see across civil society. And I think what Manisha was talking about with scaling is it's happening in pockets because it's very reactionary of supporting young people like exactly where they're at in that moment. And scaling those initiatives is a big challenge we're grappling with, to say, how do we ensure that industry, where they might not be hiring right at the moment, can still be supportive of projecting what skills young people should be investing in, and even providing that expertise, like you mentioned about bringing professionals in. With some of the employers we work with who work in HR, and it's a difficult time for them. Like it's quite a emotional time when you have to let go of 60% of your workforce. We have all these HR professionals who are volunteering to coach people through skills or to mentor. And those things happen sort of in small pockets. But I think one of the key movements across most agencies right now is finding those skill sets that are going to be transferable anywhere, so that if you do have to make a pivot post-COVID, if you have to, if you're prepping for 3 or 4 career changes now, which I think is the norm with young people looking at their future, what are sort of like the 10 key skill sets that are going to allow you to transition easier? So that's become a bit of the shift in focus, is building, especially around identifying this time as being key to building resiliency, which will take you forward in so many different career spaces. But it is a really challenging time to say, make firm decisions and do, make those pivots now. One thing I've also seen is a shift towards a lot more training around self-management, with a view that a lot more jobs could be remote or could be working from home. That's not a skill set taught in schools. And all of a sudden schools have flipped entirely to digital learning, and you have kindergartners who are, in front of a Zoom screen. And so I think it will take time for it to integrate in, but that self-management skill set, I think, is part of what everybody's going to need to grapple with going forward.
Sure. So unfortunately, we've run out of time, even though we do have a few more questions there. So perhaps if I can quickly talk about the white paper that's there, which does answer some of these questions, and then come back for one question, perhaps one last question if we have time. So I have the pleasure of releasing a white paper that Adhyayan Foundation and Antarang together has authored, which really talks to what Sarah spoke about, what Manisha, Devashish, you also spoke about, and Shaida as well, right? How do you enable young adults to lead this journey to employability? How do you get industry as well as young adults participation in this transition of young people from education to employability. The white paper actually reviews several employability models, and it stresses on the need for young adults to lead their own transitions from education to employment. Do download it. It's there on the website, on the Inspired website. And this is a huge big thank you and a shout out to Adhyayan Foundation, Anushri, who's also there on this. They've co-authored, Adhyayan has been a partner with Antarang for quite a while now. They've co-authored this white paper as well. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all the panelists, with so much going on in this online space, and Sarah, for you to wake up at this unearthly hour to join us. Truly, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. I'm sure we'll have many more opportunities to continue with this conversation. It is an important conversation to have, to start, and to pay attention to. Thank you very much. Thanks, Shahida, for spending your time, and a huge thank you to all of the people who tuned in. With the huge number of options available online today, we do realize that everyone's time is precious. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, everyone. We had 700 plus viewers for this panel discussion, and lots of questions were coming up. Thank you so much for your time.